Nate Sheets, Republican candidate for Texas Agriculture Commissioner. Thank you so much, and welcome to Ion Politics.
Jack, thanks for having me this morning. Exciting to be here with you.
You bet. So let's talk about this endorsement you got from Governor Greg Abbott. How big of a deal was that for you and your campaign, and how were you able to win that endorsement?
Well, obviously, when you have the top Republican in the entire state getting behind your campaign, and for the very first time ever siding against in a sitting statewide incumbent, that's a pretty big statement. And so you can read Governor Abbott's statement himself that he made about why he did do this. But he feels like there is just a much higher standard that we can achieve at the Texas Department of Agriculture and keep at the center of the focus of the TDA, farmers and ranchers who you're there to serve and consumers, all Texans, families, and not be so mired with ethical distractions and drama, which has been there today.
And I'm wondering what is not being done at the agency that you think needs to be done and that you will do?
That's a great question. There's been a lot of challenges there. Sid Miller's current chief of staff was formerly his consultant, campaign consultant. In November of 2024, he pled guilty to a felony of commercial bribery, actually defrauding farmers related to the hemp program. And after he pled guilty, Sid hired him as the chief of staff at the Texas Department of Agriculture, where he sits today being paid over $218,000. Subsequently, since his hiring, right at about a year ago, since March of last year, there have been over 130 employees leave Texas Department of Agriculture, many of which he fired, and some amazing people, but people with a lot of institutional knowledge. For instance, one gentleman who was over biosecurity for 10 years. And as a result of him not being present, we've had things like there's an aphid that's come in down on the Gulf Coast that's in the coastal hay, and so now we have 20 counties that have been quarantined because the very first time this pasture aphid has come in here, pasture mealybug has come in here from Australia. It's never been here before, never been detected in America, and so just not having the proper biosecurity staff in place results in things such as this. Another example would be the school lunch program, which the Texas Department of Agriculture is over. The ag commissioner is over that. We feed 5.5 million kids in the state of Texas every year in school lunch programs. The nutritional ranking nationally, Texas is 44th in the nation, 44th out of 50 states. And so, I tend to not want to focus on the personality differences. I really want to go focus on let's review the KPIs that we would hold him accountable to determine whether he's done an effective job or not. And when we look at these different KPIs, there's a big F.
And so those part of your priorities if you are to be elected?
Our priorities really stem around having Texas first, to ensure that farmers and ranchers are having their crops and their cattle purchased first by Texas. If you are going to be in a university or a school or a government agency, I'll work with Governor Abbott. And one of the reasons why I think it's important that he did endorse our campaign to show that we're going to work together coming out the gate. My opponent has been in there for 12 years and has not met with the governor one time, not once. And so I don't know how you really have a cooperative program of having a better vision for agriculture if you can't have the governor on your side. So we're going to work with Governor Abbott and make sure that we have Texas farming and ranching, purchased first and foremost. So that's one thing we'll do. Another thing we're going to do, farmers and ranchers can't afford to be in business any longer. In 1980, a farmer made 40 cents of every $1 of food, 40 cents. Today, 40 years later, they make 15 cents, 60% less, and that's their top line revenue. And at the same time, all of their input costs, their diesel, their seed, their labor, their interest, their land, their equipment, all of those have gone up almost 300%. And so literally, I talked to a farmer down in Beaumont who was farming 6,000 acres of rice, and he was on his way to go sell his crop for 40% less than it actually cost him to make. That is not sustainable anywhere in America, and not much less here in Texas. And so I'm going to focus on creating revenue and market opportunities to be able to help drive revenue, whether it's direct to consumer or direct to Texas First, or internationally, but to be able to get farmers back more to that 40 cents plus over time, to really drive their revenue and make farming and ranching a viable industry in the future for anyone that would like to be involved.
How much have the tariffs hurt farmers such as that rice farmer?
The tariffs are obviously a geopolitical tool, and unfortunately, people in agriculture at the end of the day wind up being, subject to whatever the outcomes are of that. I do totally agree with President Trump. I owned a honey company called Nature Nates. I started with one beehive in my backyard, turned it to the largest honey company in America, the number one brand. I also own Nature Nates in Australia. And so I could buy honey from Mexico, but I wasn't allowed to sell honey in Mexico. I could buy honey from Europe, but I wasn't allowed to sell honey in Europe because countries have protectionist trade policies to ensure that their agriculture is first and foremost. And so, unfortunately, farmers and ranchers in the United States have been disadvantaged. And I think that President Trump's tariffs are leveling the playing field. And ultimately, yeah, there's going to be a bit of a transition and a challenge, but ultimately, it's going to be a good thing for everybody.
Talk to me about your experience at, creating Nature Nates, which is raw and unfiltered honey, if I'm not mistaken. And I know you've since left the company that you founded, but I'm wondering what takeaways from that experience will allow you to succeed as agriculture commissioner.
Yeah, I think oddly enough, that we would have an ag commissioner that would actually come out of the bee industry. I mean, I've got cow calves, we do cutting horses, so I've got the ranch side of things, but no ag commissioner's ever had 30 years of food safety experience, manufacturing, production, sales, distribution, marketing. And so if you think about beekeeping, it is a microcosm of everything that happens in agriculture. You can have one beehive, you produce some honey, you have to extract that honey and you can put it in a drum and go sell it to a packer, somebody like what I was doing, or you can go put it in a bottle and go sell it to a consumer. And each one of those places along the way, you buy your beehive, then you buy some extraction equipment, and then you buy some bottling equipment, and then you got to figure out where you're going to sell it, how much you're going to sell it for. You've got to be able to transport it around. And so it is the most unique agriculture product that by itself is built in a direct to consumer aspect to it. And so now, if you go and take that same process and you think about that for cattle or corn or cotton, how can we take that same totality of trying to get from conception to consumption and move farmers along as much as we can down that supply chain to get them closer to the end consumer? Because that's when they can achieve higher levels of margin. Because when you're in distribution, food distribution, it's always margin on top of margin on top of margin, just getting to the end consumer. So we want to make it better and easier for farmers and ranchers to be able to get to end consumers.
I would ask you about something I saw on your website, and that was you want a federal e-verify for all employment in Texas. And I'm wondering, do farmers support that? Because I've read reports that, they've complained that because of the tougher illegal immigration policies now under President Trump, that in some cases they're finding it hard to attract workers, to keep workers, and they lose their crops in some cases, and they lose money on that. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, so you know what? Honestly, E-Verify levels the playing field because we have the H-2A program, which is a program that allows us to be able to bring Guatemalans or Mexican nationals in for a 10-month period of time. And you wind up paying a total of about $40 an hour by all of the costs that you have because you have to pay their housing and things like that. And so that's one program that's there. And President Trump and Secretary Rollins has said that they will not limit the amount of H-2A workers that are needed for agriculture because they do not want to bring disruption. But beyond that program, the E-Verify program actually is encouraging from an agriculture standpoint to make sure that the people that you have there working on your farm or on your ranch are not going to be disrupted by having someone come in like ICE and come looking for illegal aliens that you have. We saw that in California. There was a marijuana farm that ICE and the Border Patrol went in and arrested, I don't know, 50 or 60 people. As a producer, That is the last thing in the world that you need is to have your employment, disrupted by having border security or ICE come into your farm. And so what E-Verify does is that does the best that you can do to ensure that you're not going to have disruption in your business processes.
So that prevents that.
Correct.
And you support the H-2A programs and the decision not to limit that.
I do. I mean, I think ultimately we need to relook at how we engage people and Americans into agriculture. And I talk to so many young people that would love to be in agriculture, but they do not see it as a viable platform and industry into the future because it's just not financially tenable. We have more veterans in Texas than any other state in the United States, 1.5 million. Veterans are 50% more likely to be able to start a business and be successful. And so we're going to start a Veterans First program at Texas Department of Agriculture, trying to help veterans that are interested in agriculture to get into agriculture because we need not just workers, but we need young new people coming into agriculture to be able to ensure that it's a long-term industry and that we do not continue to offshore the way we feed ourselves, which honestly is a national security issue. And so we need to re-onshore food processing. We need to deconstruct and deconsolidate agriculture. In Texas, we used to have 700 meat processing plants all over the state of Texas. Today, we have four companies that control 85% of all of the meat markets in America. And so we just have to rethink how we go to market and what processing capabilities that we need for farmers and ranchers to be able to process their own products and sell to consumers. And so labor is a very important part of that. But, we need to start to figure out how we can get Americans employed in agriculture right here.
I was going to ask you about the meat processing plants. And I noticed just recently Tyson Food, Tyson Foods announced that it's going to be laying off about 1,700 people this year in Amarillo because they're eliminating one of two shifts at its meat processing plant. So, what can you, as agriculture commissioner, do about that? And to your point before, how do you increase the number of meat processing plants? Because Texas has by far and away the most cattle in the United States, and yet a lot of the processing goes out of state, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tyson laying off one of their shifts is directly related to the flow of cattle coming into America. We have the New World screwworm, which is a fly that's down in Mexico currently, and it essentially lays an egg on a living host, an animal where it's a new calf, an umbilical cord or a wound, a castrated calf or dehorned. They lay that egg, it turns into a larva that burrows inside of the animal, screws in, New World screwworm, and then eats living flesh. So we've had it in America back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and we eradicated it through sterilizing male flies. And so, because of the prevalence of the New World screwworm, because of immigration coming up from South America and cartels using cattle in that process, it's moved back up. And so, the USDA has closed the border of Texas and Mexico, not allowing animals, cattle to come in. And so the result of that is there's not the same amount of throughput into these meat processing plants that they need to be able to provide all of the beef necessary for American businesses and American consumers. And so that is a direct result of the New World screwworm. As it relates to meat processing plants, in Texas, there were regional plants, almost one in every county, multiples in every county. There's 254 counties. And so if we had over 700 plants, and so if we think about how do we look into the future, it's about strategically understanding where the meat processing capacities will need to be. And then hopefully working with President Donald Trump and helping him see that his same desire to re-onshore manufacturing, like asking NVIDIA to build a plant here in America instead of just relying upon Taiwan because of national security concerns. We need to look at food security as that same through that same lens of trying to identify what are those food processing capabilities that we need here in America so we're not relying upon our adversaries. And so, how it gets funded, that's TBD. But we need to have a vision of what we want want to be able to accomplish and go forward. And that's why I've been endorsed by both the Texas Cattle Raisers Association, the Texas Cattle Feeders Association, and actually yesterday we found out that we were endorsed by the Texas Farm Bureau, their Ag Pack. And so we have all of agriculture aligning together with a vision of doing all that we can to make sure that Texas agriculture will have its best days in front of us.
You spoke before about making school lunches healthier, school meals healthier, because they serve breakfast as well. You said Texas ranks 44th. How are you going to boost that ranking if you're elected?
We're not going to wait till January of 2027 to start working on this. We're going to start working March 4th. We're going to be in work, and we're going to bring together nutritionists, chefs, distribution, logistics, because to go and look at the totality of feeding kids in school and doing it within a limited budget is going to be a challenge, candidly. But I went and looked at what the top 10 states had in common that were in that top 10 nutrition values for school lunch programs. Every single one of them had school or had gardens attached to every level of school. They taught kids how to garden, got them involved in the production of their food, taught them about nutrition, and even taught them cooking. And so I think there's more to it than just what the food is that you're going to put on the plate. It's also helping kids understand, the food that they eat and the impact it has in their body. And last year we had Lois Kolkhorst, Senator Kolkhorst with SB 25, and that was about truth and transparency on foods that were or chemicals that were added into those foods. And a portion of that bill also ensures that kids will participate in physical education, PE, get out and work, but also nutritional education and helping kids correlate between what they eat and their long-term health. Because candidly, we're paying for it already in Texas. I think we'll spend about a little over $100 billion in Medicaid costs. In America, we spend $4 trillion a year treating symptoms of diseases related to the food that we eat. So unfortunately, we are trying to have cheap calories in America, but the impact of that is having very bad health consequences. And so if we start to think about how the food that we eat impacts our health and understanding we're paying for it on the back end, not just in dollars, but also in quality of life, how do we start to make that investment on the front end in the quality of the food that we eat to ensure that all Americans are the healthiest Americans that we can have?
What did you mean before when you said that you're not going to wait until January, you're going to start in March?
Yeah, we're
Because
gonna we're gonna assemble teams of people to really start working on these challenges and issues because we want to walk in the door just like what President Trump did. He had Brooke Rollins with up at AFPI in Washington D.C., American First Policy Institute, working on their agenda. So when they walked in the door, they knew exactly what they wanted to accomplish, and so we're not going to wait to figure out what we want to do or how we're going to do it. We're going to plan, plan, plan. And then when we get sworn in and walk in the door in January of 2027, we're going to be in business and we're going to be launching aggressively our agenda.
why should Republican primary voters choose you over Sid Miller, the incumbent?
You know, this process is about reviewing the performance of someone in their job. And so again, if you go back to the KPIs associated with his job, he likes to talk about, how he's done an amazing job with this portion or that portion, talking about school lunch programs. He actually said in a number of debates that we were first in the nation in school lunch programs and that Bobby Kennedy wanted to take them around the country and use them as the light on the shining hill to be able to show other states. That's just fiction. That's just totally made up. If you go and look at, he talks about what he did an amazing job in the gas pumps. Well, if you go and look at scales that are truck scales that we use in agriculture to measure the weight of a truck, and so a truck filled with corn pulls on that scale, gets weighed, goes over, offloads, come back and weighed, and that farmer gets paid based on that weight. Well, there's about 4,600 of those scales in Texas, and 38% of them have not been calibrated in over 3 years. And so, if you think about farmers and ranchers can't afford to be in business because their revenue's so low, the one tool that's already in place to ensure that they're getting paid what they deserve is not even being overseen correctly. Another example would be class 4 nurseries, which are nurseries of 20 acres or more. And those are nurseries that are wholesalers that sell to retailers. And there are 289 nurseries, 130 of them have not been inspected in 4 years or more. And that is how we wind up with the pasture mealybug landing here in Texas when we are not going in and inspecting these nurseries that are importing flora and fauna from all around the world. And I think 89 of them have never been inspected. And so this is a process about reviewing what's been done at the past, and do we have confidence that the person who's been in there is the right person to go forward? And when we've lost 68 farms every week in Texas and 1,000 acres of farmland, we lost 68 farms this week, last week, the week before, all the way back to 2018. We've lost over 18,000 farms in Texas. And so, again, this is about reviewing the performance of his job. Do we feel like Texas can afford another 4 years of Sid Miller? Absolutely not. And that's why I'm running to be your next Texas Department of Agriculture commissioner, to not just focus on, growing better food, but also growing food better. And that is both on the production side as well as the consumption side, because as we help farmers and ranchers be more financially successful, then we can also produce food that's healthier, more nutritious for every single Texan.
We will leave it there. Nate Sheets, Republican candidate for Texas Agriculture Commissioner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you having me today.